Hello everyone, this is Lauren Deek coming to you from the home studio. Today we're going to talk about contour drawing and negative space shapes. So the title of this is Contour Line in the Left to Right Brain Shift. This will accompany a series of exercises that I will edit into the show that will help with Module 1 of CAP161 Design Communication Media. All right, this is welcome to Contour Line and Shapes. We're examining some of the techniques of the left to right brain shift, some series of techniques and exercises that help train your brain to draw better. That were developed over a series of years of teaching and research by some of the authors that I'll reference here in the show. Contour drawing looks at an opportunity to draw with only line, with beautiful, elegant, minimal line work, and helps us really tackle the first couple of stages of building a drawing. They're also quite useful in a lot of product packaging and instructions and things like that. I referenced the IKEA instructions in my introductory show, What is Design? And the series of beautiful line drawings or contour line drawings that IKEA products have, and the legibility and reproducibility of those drawings and to accompany their products in light or in spite of printing out instructions in 35 or 40 languages. So if you need an example, a quick example of what a contour line drawing or a hidden line drawing, look for those examples across product literature and instructions. When we make drawings, we make sketches, we like to include value in them, and value is certainly part of a lot of the great sketches that we enjoy. But contour line drawing only focuses on the first three steps of this particular sequence. As we look at Lasso's example, Betty Edwards was an author who taught at University of California, San Diego for over 30 years. Wrote a wonderful book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and she encapsulated the series of steps in which we start to make a drawing. We begin by defining edges with contours. We continue to define spaces, both positive and negative, that an object occupies. We then start to focus on relationships, and then later start to look at value in the form of depicting light and shade and shadow. And so these exercises that we'll look at today, we're going to be looking at probably the first three, maybe four examples here. We'll get more into tone and line and texture later on in terms of what constitutes what Betty Edwards calls the gestalt. Gestalt sounds like Gesundheit, which is appropriate. It is a German word, and Gestalt refers to that click when our viewer starts to accept our drawing and our sketch as reality. It's the part of the brain, the cognitive brain that makes a logical conclusion. Oh, that's a landscape scene, or oh, that's the interior of a building, or oh, that's a drawing of a city street. It's when the brain starts to accept drawing or design communication products as reality. So Gestalt is a psychological term that comes from the psychological sciences in the 1920s and 1930s that refer to that logical click when our viewer starts to accept our drawing as a perception of reality. So contour line drawing in negative space really focuses on the first three steps of Paul Lasso's logical sequence of how we start to build a drawing. Overall geometries and proportions, the beginnings of basic components, negative space relationships, the differences between solid and negative or positive and negative, which are typically in a building are referring to the facade versus fenestration, or the solid of the exterior coverings versus windows, and then the location of details and other components from that. And then adding, Paul logically or typically added tone and texture and shadow later on. So contour drawing focuses on the first building blocks in negative space, the first building blocks of a drawing as we go through this logical sequence that Paul defined for us, and as Betty Edwards also defined for us. So what is a contour line? If we had to look at a definition of what a contour line was, our good friend Frank Ching, in your textbook for the course, Design Drawing, defines contours as the things that dominate our perception of the visual world. The mind infers the existence of contours from the patterns of light and dark that the eyes receive. So the differences in light and dark that we start to see, our mind assigns a contour to separate those different values or different shades of light and dark. Our visual system seeks out and creates a cognitive line along the points where two fields of contrasting light or color meet. Some of these edges are clear, others are lost as they change color or value. But in its need to identify objects, the mind is able to fabricate a continuous line along each edge. In the seeing process, the mind enhances these edges and sees them as contours. So Frank is really speaking to the process by which your eye, your retina, and your brain, that information that travels from the optic nerve into the brain, helps us understand and see the difference between one object or another. A contour drawing looks a little bit different than a value drawing, and in Frank's book, Design Drawing, pairs, we love pairs. Pairs are wonderful subjects to draw because they have a lot of contours in them, a lot of interesting curvatures and spaces and edges with them. So a contour drawing of a pair, based on how Frank would draw it, would involve a heavy line representing the overall object shape and its separation from its background. It would involve, for Frank, some what we call hit-go-hit lines or broken lines, as Betty Edwards would call it, to show the additional level of contours that are existing on the surface of the pair as they face us. And in this case, Frank is using dots or even pointillism to describe the different edges of light, shade, and shadow that he's showing here in the pair. If none of those things existed, if the outward line were the only line to exist, the pair would look very, very flat. And nobody likes a flat pair. I certainly don't. And so you can see these different lines that Frank is using, from heavy line or defined medium line or broken hit-go-hit line or even pointillism, help to give our brain the gestalt, that click that allows us to say, oh, that's a pear, and not an orange or an apple or another person for that matter. So contour line drawings are very efficient in the way that they help our brain start to perceive things, or at least the representation of things, versus a lot of the different values. In this value drawing here, Frank is using cross-hatching, probably with a soft graphite pencil or even a black color pencil, and carefully is leaving wonderful character of different light, shade, and shadow here to show the edges. So he's using the same principles of contour drawing, but he's using value to build up the perception of the surfaces as they read against each other. Some beautiful drawings in design drawing. Please take a look at the textbook and enjoy a lot of the drawings and examples that Frank has provided for us there. Another drawing / diagram that Frank uses to illustrate what we're talking about here is the connection between the eye, that's an eye, and the hand, and how we begin to represent the built environment when we start to draw it. So this might be the interior of a cathedral or an academic building or a reading room at a library. And you can see that Frank is assigning a contour to describe the difference between this vault and the ceiling itself, curving down and then starting to build into the column and capital, and saying that this is how the brain and the eye work. Our brain assigns a contour to help define that particular difference of value or surface, and then into the shapes of this column and capital that are defining the middle ground in this particular view. So when we draw observed spaces in the built environment or natural environment, we are assigning contours to these differences of value or color, according to Frank's definition. Frank goes into this other example of this beautiful deck chair, probably from his own collection for that matter, this chaise lounge or deck lounger. Most noticeable contours are those which separate one thing from another. These contours give rise to the images of objects we see in visual space. They circumscribe an object and define the outer boundary between the figure and its background. In limiting and defining the edges of things, contours also describe their shape. But contours do more than describe the outline of a flat, two-dimensional silhouette. Some contours travel inward at folds or breaks in a plane. Others are formed by overlapping or projecting parts forward. Still other contours describe the shapes of spaces and shadows within a form. In seeing and drawing, we are able to follow these contours as they eloquently describe the three-dimensional nature of forms in space. Frank writes and draws almost poetically in how he describes these things. So do please pay attention to the way that he writes these definitions in terms of how they translate these complex and abstract and visual forms and phenomena that we probably take for granted in our everyday life. But in terms of how we break them down into making a good drawing, Frank has very eloquently described these things that are happening between our eye and between our minds to create this cognition of space and place. So let's look at some everyday objects. This is really the best way to start. In Paul Lasso's Freehand Sketching, great little book that we reference a lot in the course and is available on our course reserves library list. Here's one of his teapots. This is from his kitchen. He's using just the contours to describe not just the differences between the different components of the teapot. We can see the negative space around the handle. We can see the curvature around the spout. We can see the layers of curvature around the lid. But Paul is also using contours to describe the reflection of the tabletop that this is sitting on. This is not floating in space. We aren't in a zero-gravity atmosphere. But he's using contours to describe the reflection of the tabletop onto the bottom belly curvature of this teapot, and probably the light source that is coming from either a window or an overhead lamp in his kitchen or dining room. So all of this comes together to give us the perception of the teapot. Again, if none of these contours were existing, the teapot would appear very flat. Paul goes on to say, there are several other objects that make good subjects for contour drawings. The best are objects whose configurations are unpredictable. Crumpled pieces of paper, pine cones, shoes, tote bags, and the like. We'll do some drawings today of those types of things. Remember to allow yourself the luxury of looking very carefully and not worrying about the amount of time it takes to complete the drawing. These exercises train your eye to believe what you see as you try to map that in a drawing. So the examples that Paul has in his book on how to begin to make good drawings involve the complex lines, shapes, and spaces that are found in a simple pair of shoes. And so all of you have shoes, and so I encourage you to take off your shoes, hopefully not a terribly odoriferous experience for you, and begin to draw some of the interesting shapes and spaces that you have there. So you can see again an overall contour that resembles the outline of the shape. There's some overlap. He isn't just drawing one shoe, he's drawing two, and so there's an overlap there. But also the subspaces, edges, and different components that go into a shoe. A shoe is a very complex object and involves a lot of materials and a lot of craft to put it together. Grommets and lacing and different portions of leather and nubuck and polyester and all those materials that go into it. So a good subject to begin to learn and to practice contour drawing. Other examples from Ching, tote bags are fantastic. Leather tote bags, canvas tote bags have a lot of wonderful overlaps in them and a lot of shapes and components. Again, there's no tone here, so he is just starting to use contours here to describe the different curvatures and overlaps and different components of that. Here are Frank's eyeglasses, and you can see here this wonderful outer contour here representing the lens, and these thinner lines, broken lines, here to describe the arm of the sunglass, of the glasses here, probably the left arm there, disappearing behind the lens, but showing off enough to give our brain, our perception, the impression that there is something back there. And so you can see the arm of the glasses just disappear behind the lens, but there's enough of a line there to say there's something back there. And that starts to describe the translucent, transparent nature of the eyeglass lens itself. And again, negative space. Here's a negative space shape right here. Here's a negative space shape that's existing there. Contour drawings also examine the intricate, beautiful, different ways that negative space shapes start to form a composition. Pure contour drawings or pure lines, or what we call hidden line drawings, means the lines have character. They have their own character. We've already covered a couple of different ways that different characters of line or different weights of lines or the hierarchy of line can contribute to that. Betty Edwards' book, she described these categories. This is a bold line. She's looking at one of our houseplants here, by the way. A bold line, a broken line, some repetition or stop and go kinds of things. A pure line, this would be a probably thinner line weight, but is very carefully positioned on the paper to just look at pure contours. And what she calls a lost and found line. Some folks call this a hit-go-hit, or a line which becomes bold and becomes thin as it goes around and describes the contours. To do this, it would require us to either position our pencil or hold our pencil a certain way, or have a pressure-sensitive pen. Felt tip pens can do this. That would describe a different line weight as it goes around the stem and where the overlap occurs here, becoming a thinner line weight as it goes up. The materials that we've selected for you start to do that because they have the ability to react to pressure or even react to the way that we hold a particular pen or pencil that allows you to create a different line. So there's a lot of motor skills that are involved here. If you've been practicing your golf swing or practicing your layup or practicing your table tennis lately, there's a lot of intricacies and subtleties that involve the way that all of those athletic moves occur. Same in drawing. Same thing in drawing. We are developing different motor skills here, and we'll practice those in the exercises to start to give character to your drawings that will really entice your viewer. Another pear and a bear. A pear and a bear. I love it. A bear and a pear. Ah, okay. And so even different equipment might lend itself to it. This is probably a brush pen on the right that starts to react to pressure sensitivity to the paper and gives us different characters of lines. In the field, when we are making drawings in the field, observational drawings in the field, here's an example from Frank Ching. What I love about Frank's work, and I think you'll start to see this as you flip through the both form, space, and order and design drawing, is sometimes it's interesting that Frank makes some very clear decisions here and makes decisions about what he doesn't draw versus what he draws. So it's just as enticing, or perhaps it's just as elegant, what Frank isn't drawing here. He's creating focus on this doorway and on the entrance from the street past this wall and into the entrance of this home. I'm guessing this is probably either in Japan, Korea, or China. And then framing the view with elements of the landscape and just letting the drawing disappear into the paper. I call this fading into white. That idea that a drawing can disappear back into the paper, disappear into fine lines, disappear into the edges. And what that does for you, it creates a visual hierarchy that allows our viewer to focus on the things that we are most interested in, the doorway in this case. And so Frank is describing an entry procession from the public space of the street, from the complexity and hustle and bustle of the city into this private home. He's doing that very elegantly by making careful decisions about what he's not drawing as well as what he's drawing. And you can see it is a contour drawing. There's no value here. There is just the purity of line to describe the different edges and spaces and negative spaces that are contemplating this particular view. So take a look again at his drawings in the textbook and examine them for what is there and what is not there. And this city scene, I believe this is Urbino, Italy. Again, the interesting thing about Frank is what he hasn't drawn. And so the eye is being able to move all the way around this composition. Clearly, he's interested in this campanile or this bell tower on this church, going up to the fortress on top of this hill. But he wanders down using the tree line here and these layers of the middle ground to take us down and into another corner of this urban street. And you can see he wasn't interested here, but he's creating these visual elements, almost moving us around the composition in this triangular fashion, or perhaps a trapezoidal fashion. Our eye starts probably around the bell tower, works its way up to the top, works our way down over the fortress, and then down this city street here. And that probably is a record of how Frank was experiencing this particular view. I've been able to spend some time with Frank in Atlanta and started to draw with him and see the way that he takes a complex urban scene like this and starts to create focus areas that make for a more interesting drawing. It's not everything. He's leaving out the things that he's not interested in. So again, very complex urban scenes can be shown very beautifully with elegant, minimalist contour drawings. Here's one of mine. This is the Einstein Tower in Potsdam, Germany. I'm using a brush pen, a Japanese brush pen, which is typically used for making Chinese characters, Japanese calligraphy. It is a pressure-sensitive pen, so the harder I press on the pen to the paper, it creates a bolder line. The lighter that I hold the pen, or hold it vertically 90 degrees to the paper, it makes for a thinner line. So it allowed me to capture the complexities and curvatures of this piece of architecture by Erich Mendelsohn. It's done in the later 1920s, but is considered one of the early modernist masterpieces in Germany because it has a lot of interesting organic feel to it. It almost looks like an animal sitting there in the landscape. This is an astronomical observatory on top. This is a tree line in the back, obviously, and the tower exists on a research campus at the edge of the city, the edge of the Berlin metroplex. Traveling around Greece, doing some fast contour drawings. These are 2 or 3 minute ink-line sketches done on a very hot day on the island of Santorini. Again, not looking at a lot of value, but using a simple ink pen to describe the cragginess of this dry stacked wall, the smoothness of a wall that has been plastered over. The Greeks like to build walls with a lot of native stone, but they tend to plaster over them, which creates these crisp white surfaces, and then leading up into this bell tower of this neighborhood church. It's one of the more photographed scenes in Santorini, but I was fortunate enough to do a series of study sketches there. Another city on the western side of the island of Santorini. This is the town of Ia, and it's very popular with tourists. We're looking at a harbor here, the edge of the caldera. Santorini was a former volcano that exploded probably a few thousand years ago, and these Greek hill towns are wonderful compositions of native materials and of native construction methods. I also like to make drawings of students sleeping. It's the only time that they're sitting still sometimes, but we have a lot of time. When we travel with students, we have a lot of time on planes and trains and automobiles, and so I often make contour drawings of them as they sleep. There is some value that starts to happen in the hair or the unshaven surface of the student, but you can see that most of these are contours, again, made with boldness or with lightness or with stop and go. To start to describe the scene. Again, framed. I love things that are framed, and so the window of the train here is actually framing these two students who are now alumni of CAP. We like to take field trips around the Midwest and around the world. We often like to stop at botanical gardens or at conservatories to look at different exotic plants. This is the Crone Conservatory in Cincinnati, if you're familiar with that part of Cincinnati, and these wonderful plants that create these fantastic contours and shapes. Again, the different weight of the pen in terms of how I hold it or how I apply it to the paper starts to create emphasis in this plant as well as define some of the negative spaces in between. And then I put the plant, I put it in a frame that starts to really have it, occupy the page in a fantastic way. This is the Roby House on the Chicago field trip. This is a fantastic house by Frank Lloyd Wright that now exists as part of the University of Chicago campus, visited by a lot of tourists who come to Chicago, creating emphasis, again, just by a bolder line showing the foreground and then starting to look at some of the details and the landscape materials that are also part of the composition. There's another building behind it that sort of blocks out or frames out some of our perception of it, but you can see also some thinner lines that are describing cast shadows onto the ground. Didn't have a lot of time to make this drawing. I threw this together probably in 90 seconds. And so learning from Frank, learning from Paul, learning from Betty, applying some of those ideas and principles of fast contour drawings allow for a more efficient capture of this particular scene. Of course, I probably took a photograph of it as well, but I was really interested in the elegance of just this indoor-outdoor space. This is a cantilever roof over an outdoor terrace at the Roby House. Frank Lloyd Wright is really well known for his blurring of the lines between interior and exterior space. So how do we get there? What is the way? What are the ways that we get there? We have to unlock our brain. So unlocking the power of the left to right brain shift. Betty Edwards wrote in her books that there was something to the left brain and the right brain, and that the current brain research of the time argued that there were two hemispheres in terms of how we form cognition. Some of that research has been debunked, or more advanced research that there isn't probably a big difference between the left and the right brain. But at the time, in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, there was this notion that the left brain, the left hemisphere, did certain things and so formed cognition in certain ways. That the right brain had a different way of balancing those things between verbal and nonverbal, analytic versus synthetic, symbolic versus actual, abstract versus analogic, temporal versus non-temporal, rational versus non-rational, digital versus spatial, logical versus intuitive, and linear versus holistic. And again, this represents the research of the time in terms of how we understood and how psychologists understood cognition and how we perceive things. Some of this, or if not all of it, has been debunked in recent years. But still, you'll hear some of us old-timers refer to the left brain and the right brain in terms of how these two different things balance to form a complete picture of cognition. I argue that you could explain left versus right brain theory again back into the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And you've heard me speak to this before, but again, I think a lot of my thinking and a lot of my teaching and a lot of my writing about teaching really centers around this difference between the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. So again, just to reinforce this particular theme in teaching and learning, and how we learn and understanding how we learn centers a lot around the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. Betty Edwards taught for 30 years in University of California, San Diego, and some of her exercises would involve copying drawings or perceived drawings. This is a contour drawing by Pablo Picasso, done in 1920. You can see the date down here, 26th of May, 1920. You can see the date in the lower right. This is a portrait of the musical composer Igor Stravinsky. You might know his work, The Rite of Spring, which was a controversial ballet and orchestra performance that caused a riot the first time it was performed. And so this is Picasso's portrait. You can see that there's some interesting things going on in Picasso's mind. You can see that the chair, it looks almost distorted. You can see that the hands are as big as the face. You can see that one lens of Igor's glasses are larger than the other. You can see a pronounced nose. If you know Picasso's work, it involves a lot of distortion and a lot of emphasis. So this is probably not. This is very characteristic of some of Picasso's work. But in order to make a reproduction of Igor's portrait, it requires one to really carefully study every single contour and place it in relationship to each other. And so Betty Edwards concluded that the best way to learn how to unlock the full potential of your brain was to actually draw these things upside down. And so she would take images like this and flip them upside down, and then we would ask students to reproduce them with the position of upside down. Now what that does is it tricks your brain into not accepting that this is a person sitting on a chair, and forces your brain to look at every single line, every single negative space as an independent thing and connected to everything else. It actually helps us draw better. And so her students, she could always tell when her students didn't do the assignment correctly. And so the Picasso mistakenly copied right side up by a university student versus the Picasso drawing upside down the next day by the same student. So by drawing things upside down, we actually have the ability to unlock the full potential of our brain to make clear and concise drawings. The difference is palpable because the brain is falling behind some of its earlier logical tendencies to categorize things, versus looking at every single contour and every single line, every single shape. This is how Betty Edwards was able to make a name for herself and sell a lot of textbooks over the course of the 20th century because her methods found ways to unlock the full potential of the student. And so the examples that are in her book of students after only 6 weeks of practice go from this to this, from this to this, from this to this, and from this to this. The techniques and methods that were in her book that we use today in our courses and as we've assembled together in the course do work in terms of making you a better artist, a better illustrator, helping you make better drawings. So you too can go from this to this. Let's start with a pure contour exercise. Pure contour involves not looking at the subject. So we call this exercise talk to the hand. Betty shows how you can set yourself up here. So you're going to be looking at one of your hands, probably your non-dominant hand, and drawing it with the non-dominant hand. But to do a pure contour or a blind contour, you do not look at the drawing while you're making it. Okay, so this will be a new experience for some of you, and will be perhaps difficult. But as you can see, if you can take a piece of paper and secure it to your tabletop, either leaving it in the sketchbook or actually taking it to the tabletop, this will really assist you. And turn your chair, your position, so that you are looking away from the drawing. This is a right-handed person, obviously, looking at his left. But this exercise will involve making some gestures with your hands, hopefully not too rude, and starting to make some blind contour drawings. Some examples from Paul's book. Paul uses the same exercise because we all have an extra hand carrying around with us. We always have an opportunity to make a drawing because the interesting contours and folds and overlaps and executive spaces that exist just with your non-dominant hand. All right, so our first exercise is a blind contour. So I have my non-dominant hand here. Hello. And I will not look at it as I draw. So I will start with a line. Just do my best not to look at the paper itself. And probably not pick up pencil at all. I've added some rings here to add to the complexity. And you'll see very quickly here, it's not going to be terribly accurate, but it's going to train your brain to look and see as opposed to what your brain thinks it sees. I'll do this. Try to make it a continuous line. Back into the puffiness of the palm. Back into the edges there. And then I wore a long sleeve jumper here to cover up my hairy arms, but also to create a edge or boundary from the hand into the sleeve. So that doesn't look like much. That's okay. Make a different gesture. Do it again. I'll turn the paper. Do something else. Again, try not to make your gestures too rude. And maybe something like that. I'll start another one here. A lot going on here with the sleeve. Creates a really noticeable boundary there. Up into the ring. Negative space. Overlap of the fingers. And that four-finger ring. Thumb is sort of disappearing underneath. Okay. All right. So those are examples of blind contour drawing. We'll continue with modified contour drawing shortly. An educational and mind-stretching experience for you. Our second exercise, we can continue using the same piece of paper actually, and just fill up an entire page of these. If you will. Let's make our drawings as as close to life size as possible, if not maybe close to half. But we'll continue on the same page. What's called a modified contour is when we're actually allow ourselves to look at the subject. So Betty here has a description of the exercise as we'll do it. On the previous exercise, we were not looking at our hand, but now we will take a look at the hand. And so, building on the skills from the previous exercise, we will continue with a modified contour, which allows us to see the hand itself. And then you'll see me start to organize all these around a page. Just kind of move the page around. You can turn the paper a couple of different ways, and then I will poche or fill in the negative space with pencil. Poche is a French word which means pocket. So if you can imagine this pocket between these two lines, these major lines, this is what fills the pocket. And we'll use just soft pencil for this, and we'll start to make a full composition. So just with our basic beginning blind contour and modified contour drawings here, these first exercises, we will already start to make a composition with them. So we will do that now. Let's continue with modified contours so I can actually look at my hand while I'm drawing it now. I've got my two previous ones here. Not too shabby, but I'll turn the paper around. You'll notice I have it's typical loose leaf copy paper. I've got a couple of sheets of paper underneath it though, because it often cushions the drawing so that the graphite is not picking up the exact tabletop surface. A lot of you will have either a hard tabletop or a studio desktop or a dorm room desktop. I've got a portable drafting table here for my purposes here. But I always like to put a couple of sheets of paper underneath just to cushion it, so that the pencil is not picking up all of the texture of the surface itself. So this portion here, I'll make another gesture with my non-dominant hand. You can see I've got a couple of rings on here just to add to the complexity, and I'll just kind of lay that there. But for a modified contour, I can look at the hand while I'm drawing it. So I'm looking at it now. Just going to look at my sleeve. Don't worry about laughing at the tension or the anxiety that involves a pure contour drawing is palpable. I mean, even at my age, having taught this for a number of years and practiced it for years, the blind contour is always a little bit stressful. I'm going to let this overlap into the other drawing. I'm not going to worry about it. Just let this overlap. overlap. Here's the thumb. All those folds on the thumb. I've got a standard number 2 Dixon Ticonderoga soft number 2 pencil here. I'm just going to adjust the pressure of the pencil for lighter lines and adjust the pressure for bolder lines. Edge of the thumb and forefinger going disappearing up into the other drawing. I'm not going to worry about that. No worries. We here in Muncie, Indiana are very proud of Bob Ross. You probably know Bob Ross from memes or from his resurgence in popular culture. We even have an entire channel on Peacock now just devoted to Bob Ross and his painting programs. Those were filmed right here in Muncie, Indiana, across the street from CAP at the Ball Communications Building throughout the 1980s and 1990s. So we have a very special connection to Bob Ross and his therapeutic public television show that inspired now 3 generations of amateur painters. And so if you see my dialogue straying into Bob Ross territory, you'll know why. It's because we have a special connection to him at Ball State here in Muncie. Just let this overlap directly into the other one. Remember, the middle finger is longer than the others. Beginning of some negative space there. I'll change positions and change gestures. Go for something a little more curvature here, maybe. That almost open or closed fist. I'll occupy that here on the left side of the paper. Starting to look at this overall puffiness shape of the palm. Start to look at an overall shape. Maybe the hand exists within this. And maybe I can start to locate contours within that. Into the ring. Into the pointer finger. Meeting the thumb ring. So at any point, just stop the video and practice, start the video again. Feel free to use this YouTube interface, this new way of learning at your own pace. I tend to draw really fast. I've been doing this for a number of years, and so have great joy and great confidence in every drawing that I do. Hopefully you'll reach similar joy and confidence as you practice your drawings, as you develop a sketching regimen and culture to your life, as you add these skills and practice and discipline into your learning environment, into your learning regimen, and that you can start to build a life of joy and gratitude around making your own art. Using that art to communicate design intention, communicate design goals. These skills are all part of building up will hopefully be a very rich lifestyle for you. One that is filled with art and with discovery and exploration. Okay. So we've got a composition there now going. Looks like these hands are starting to join or overlap into each other. I'm going to do one more. Maybe something here. A little bit of a pointer. Something which can kind of anchor this side of the composition. I'll just go for it here. Pointer finger, so confident, knows what it's doing. Middle finger, not so sure. Thumb, receiving support. All those folds on the interior there, oh my goodness. prove I'm getting older. Thumb, middle finger. A lot of these overlap. You can space these out if you want. I'm just overlapping these. We're just going to use our paper efficiently. Paper is a big part of our questions and conversations around sustainability. It takes 3 gallons of clean water every time you make a sheet of paper. So if you're from part of the world or a culture that doesn't have a lot of paper, it just involves a lot of imports and exports to get it there. I studied in Germany for one summer, and every single sheet of paper in Germany is reused at least once or twice before it's thrown away or recycled. Different culture than us in the United States at the time, and so as we start to look at sustainability and saving our resources, remember that every sheet of paper takes 3 gallons of clean water. Okay, I have a composition. I have some negative space in that composition, so I will really get in here, emphasize some of that negative space. There's some negative space over here. And if I were to frame it out, I've got my trusty parallel glider. This is my favorite parallel glider. This is from Alvin, made in Poland. Alvin is a German company, but this is made in Poland. There's other parallel gliders. It has 2 rubber tires on it, like a bicycle, which has 2 rubber tires on it. I will take my parallel glider and I'll just frame out this side. That forms another negative space shape. And I'll frame out this side, forming another negative space shape here. And decide whether or not it needs another one. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's one more just over here that forms another negative space shape over here. Now, if you don't have a parallel glider or rolling ruler, you can use a credit card or a student ID or a ruler or straight edge of any kind, really. And so I will now start to pocher. Pocher means pocket in French. Take the soft part of this dull pencil now. This pencil's pretty dull now that we've done a few exercises with it. And I'll start to pocher the negative space just with this number 2 pencil. And using the rolling ruler parallel glider in this fashion, I can fill in this portion of the composition. And again, feel free to stop the video at any point. Continue to work. And just with a series of these simple contour drawings, we can make a full composition now already. Over time, the pencil will start to dull. So I've got my trusty pencil sharpener here. This is a Twist and Sharp from Bostitch. There's a couple of brands of pencil sharpeners that we like. This one is particularly fun. It has a little ratchet on the inside, which makes a wonderful little sound. It allows you to get a sharp point each time. And I can use this rolling ruler as an edge to make some regularity in the rendering poching of this negative space shape. Okay, now we have to decide which way we want to orient that. There's some different character to that. Maybe this lower right here can have our signature. So go ahead and sign that. Another Bob Ross reference there. And that's ready to scan. So either using Genius Scan for your phone or one of the flatbed scanners in the CAP library or Bracken library environment, you can get that ready for scanning and ready for submission. Okay, so that represents now the blind contour and modified contour exercises. We affectionately call talking trash. So previous one was talk to the hand. This one is talking trash. So we like to look at some complex objects that are fairly simple in their nature. You could pick out a pine cone from outdoors. We have lots on campus here. But we can really just start with a piece of crumpled paper. So take a piece of paper and crumple it up, lay it on your desk there, kind of get some lighting on it, either from above or from the side. And we'll do several contour line drawings, line studies, and also start to look at negative spacing between them. As you can see, though, a simple piece of crumpled paper has a lot of intricate edges, folds, negative spaces, overlaps, also different tonal qualities, a lot of stuff happening right there. I mean, there's so much happening just in a simple piece of crumpled paper. You will hopefully look at it an entirely different way when we start to draw it that way. And then start to organize them around a page. You can see how I've incorporated the shadow cast onto the paper, onto the tabletop, and started to look at the negative space. If we take a look at this drawing and then squint, we can start to see that the poche itself is already starting to become a new shape in an interesting way. And that we have a series of different line weights, different characters of lines, some broken lines, some bold lines. We'll do our best to really capture the character of this crumpled paper as it exists on the paper, and then start to render or poche the negative space in between. All right, let's take a look at talking trash. All right, so I've got a half sheet of paper here just crumpled up. You can see with my light source here, it's casting a shadow directly onto the drafting table. I'm going to just position that. We use the same crumpled paper for a couple of different ones, so I'm just going to position that around and place the paper relative to it. I'm going to look directly at it, so what you see with the camera here will be different than what I see. That's okay. Just use your own crumpled paper. I'm going to, with my eyes now, I'm going to trace the overall outline or shape of the entire figure first, and then carefully just give myself a bit of a boundary to work with. I mean, that's the general area that this crumpled paper is going to exist in. And what that does is it plans out on your paper how much space you're going to devote to this thing. And you can see that's very close. That's very close to real size. So that's why the crumpled paper exercise is so helpful for us. Because it's a simple, small object that anyone can make, but it has a lot of interesting complex folds and edges into it. So within that, now I will carefully start from one side and with my eye begin to trace these contours and then translate them through the arm and the hand to the pencil point itself. I'll probably start at the left. And you can see coming up. So do this with your own crumpled paper. Start to see that. That edge actually is disappearing. And this one comes over like this, round, up, and down. And that's the beginning of an overall outline for the crumpled paper as I see it from my angle. Then, that's the outline. So now with a thinner line, I'm going to come in and start to develop these edges that are now coming towards me. What we see now is that this is a really complex piece of stuff already. Architect Frank Gehry likes to often laud the value of a piece of crumpled paper because of the beauty and complexity of folds and edges that are very influential to him in his architecture. So, you've probably heard Frank Gehry. He's referred to in popular culture. He's been on a Simpsons episode. He's known for very wild, complex, interesting, folded, crumpled forms that capture light and form really complex and rich interior spaces. Frank Gehry practices out of Los Angeles. He is of Polish origin. Grew up in Toronto. To Los Angeles early in his career. Buildings include the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, as well as the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, Spain. So the crumpled paper exercise given to us by Waldo, referred to, I think, also in Frank Ching's books. It's just a great exercise you can do anywhere, traveling, waiting for somebody. You can always draw your hand or a piece of crumpled paper. Okay, so that's minus the shadows now. If you want to now, you can start to bring in the cast shadow that you're seeing on your tabletop surface as another contour. That could be interesting for you. Totally optional though. And that is a first take on crumpled paper. Now take that piece of crumpled paper and just turn it a different orientation. One piece of crumpled paper will work for multiple portions of this exercise. I'm going to start with the overall shape. Give it an area for it to exist in, and then go in and attack. Attack! An outer edge. Tracing the outer dimensions of the object with my eye, taking that cognitive tracing and sending it to the pencil. Commanding my arm and hand to react to that information. Adjusting pressure on the pencil to create emphasis. All of these complex folds and edges. Rich surfaces and light and shade and shadow in there. Starting to see these things entirely for the first time. Boy, there's a lot in there. A lot of stuff going on in there. Oh. And there's a cast shadow there as well. Turn it again. Let's do 3. You can even turn your paper as well. Turn it over. Try to get that crumpled paper to sit a certain way. You can modify it. Get it lit a certain way. If you don't like the shadow or you don't like the darkness, adjust your light fixture or your lighting source. Just do the overall here. There's a lot going on in there. And then carefully in here. So much going on. Wow. So again, just stop the video, fast forward, whatever. However the video can help you accomplish this particular drawing. It looks pretty good by itself. Again, interested, you can start to look at negative space in between, turn it again, give it another crumple, and just kind of finish out this portion of the page. That's really something now. Maybe this is a negative space shape. Maybe it's not. Maybe we just leave it. Maybe there's something to that. We just leave it there. There's something to this drawing by itself. So I could poché in the negative space in between these four drawings, or just leave it go. I could maybe give it a frame. I still like giving things frames. Just let it exist within a frame. You can always poché it later, or even attach in a color in Photoshop to make it interesting for our portfolios. Make it fun, or have it exist within a frame. So much of architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning exists within a frame of reference. So maybe we poché that, maybe we don't. Maybe we just leave it like that. And that's a composition. Assign that. And that's ready to scan. So again, Genius Scan for the iPhone or Android, or any of the flatbed scanners at Bracken Library or the CAP library. That's ready to scan and submit. Build some still lifes that involve having us look at modified contour and negative spaces. We call this chairs, stairs, leaves, frames, beams, and branches. Oh my! So this involves observing either an exterior space or interior space, either at your residence hall, at one of the libraries, or around the CAP building, provided you can adequately socially distance. But there's lots of great subjects just within our campus environment that we'll start to look at. For purposes of this exercise, though, we'll start with an image that I have from my collection. We can grab this image or look at a nearby chair. I've taken two of my chairs and overlap them so that they start to create some really interesting negative spaces in between them. It's like they're dancing together or something else. But at any rate, there's a series of negative spaces that occur here. So you can do a screen grab of this image. Hopefully you know how to do a screen grab with your PC, with your phone, or otherwise. You can see that it is a square format image, so we will create a frame on our sketchbook, starting with a square frame, and then we'll start to locate all of these negative spaces and contours that exist in the frame. Okay, we're ready now for the exercise involving two chairs. If you have a screen grab of that handy, I've got it on my laptop computer just off camera here. So I'm looking at that image. I want to proportion out first. It is a square image, so I want to proportion out a square frame here. Maybe I can carefully do that by creating a boundary for the drawing to exist in on the page. This could be in loose leaf paper, copy paper, or your sketchbook. So this is a square format frame, which Instagram popularized in the last couple of years. So the composition exists within that frame. Why that's important is that as we look at the image, we will look at the relationship of different portions of the chairs as they exist within the frame. So I will move over here a little bit to the right because I will do a picture-in-picture. There, okay. We'll do a picture-in-picture image here. So start to look at the negative space and shape from one chair relative to the frame on that left side. These are chairs from IKEA I picked up just outside of Cincinnati. Some friends and I, we made an IKEA caravan. So get a bunch of people in a big moving van. You can all shop at IKEA at the same time. There's some angles here that are interesting. So how do we measure an angle? How do we judge an angle? Well, I look at the image and with my pencil I will close one eye and hold up that angle. So I can try to demonstrate it for you here, but I'm looking at the image on my laptop just off frame here. I will close one eye and take my pencil and copy that angle, and I can bring it down to the paper. So if we close one eye while we're holding up a pencil or pen, we can look at an angle and then bring it down to the paper. Ah, there's the angle right there. Okay. So as we look at the different legs of these chairs, I will take my pencil and close one eye and kind of move and look at that and then bring it down to the paper. Here's the other leg of the chair there. Here's the forward leg. I just take my pencil or pen and I copy the angle with one eye closed, and then I can bring it down to the paper. And that's probably right about there. Now the seat of the first chair is down here. The seat of the second chair is moving towards us. So again, I will look at the image, I will close one eye, I will take my pencil and measure that angle, and then bring it down to the paper. There, that lives right about there. So these reference lines really help us understand how we chose this image, and some of the composition or the madness behind some of this image, and these chairs and this negative space and the wonderful stuff, that negative space shapes that exist. But it requires us sometimes to try to copy an angle or measure an angle. We can do that, as I say, just by using your pencil and by closing one eye. You can get a reference angle for a lot of this stuff. Reinforce this. There's some interesting, lovely contours with these chairs, these plastic chairs, which I picked up at IKEA probably 12 years ago. Oops, made a mistake. It's okay, I'll just leave it in. As Bob Ross says, there are no mistakes, only happy accidents. Happy accidents. I have a feeling I'm going to be quoting Bob Ross a lot in this course, so bear with me. Yeah. So right there, some lovely contours in here. You can see a lot of those contours and edges are happening. Those differences between light, shade, and shadow. Those plastic edges, this molded plastic chair. There's a little drain hole there in case the chair gets rained on. A lot of folks like to use these outdoors. You can always drain out any rain that falls on the chair. There's the leg back there. This continues like so, and down. Oh, there's a shadow in there. That's another contour, don't you know? Oh yeah. Yes, there we go. Big one there. Light, shade, shadow. Another negative space shape in there. Another chair leg there. Back there. There. Okay, that's it's a nice number 2 pencil light contour. Let's take our Pilot Fine Liner pen. This is a felt tip pen. We sell it here down at the Communication Resource Center, also known as the CRC, the basement of CAP. Please check with them for operating hours. We sell a lot of pens and pencils at cost to you, just so they're conveniently on hand for folks who just want to be able to purchase something quickly. I'm using a stop-go lost and found line there. I'm using a bold line here. I'll use what we call hit-go-hit or stop-and-go or lost and found line for these inner edges. Betty Edwards called them lost and found. Mike Lynn calls them hit-go-hit. It's a broken line that reappears and helps define a thin contour, which represents an area of shade or shadow or an area of curvature within a form. Nice bold line up here, one chair leg disappearing into the negative space of the other chair. Again, maybe the chairs are dancing together, or doing the tango or something. Those pencil lines allow me to practice some of the more complex contours. Allow me to practice and explore some of those. The pen lines are more confident in that we've explored a lot of these values and we are translating them into contours. So if I made any mistakes or any happy accidents on pencil, then I can kind of judge them and correct them with pen. Do the frame. Some folks like to turn their paper. If that works for you. In some situations that's possible. Other situations it's not because the paper might be taped down, but that represents there just the contours of this chair composition. Now, if we were to start to really create emphasis on the negative space, again, I have a piece of paper underneath. We call that a blotter paper. So when we use permanent markers, I often transfer onto the surface. So it's always good to have another sheet of paper underneath as a blotter paper. And blotter papers become compositions onto themselves. I'll just take this Sharpie permanent marker. This is the chisel tip Sharpie. I love it because the chisel tip gives us a nice thick edge to work with. I'll start that in the upper corner here, and then using a bold stroke, make a continuous stroke, overlap slightly, make continuous strokes, because continuous overlapping strokes are the most efficient use of your time and the ink. Not a bold stroke. Use bold strokes as you go from edge to edge. What I like to do is cover the whole boundary here and then overlap, overlap, overlap. Just like I used to mow lawns as a teenager, you always do the outer portion of the lot and then you overlap back and forth in between. So if you've cut any lawns recently, some of you probably had that duty while you were in quarantine recently. Same principle. Always do the outer edge and then bold overlapping strokes in between. Outer edge, outer edge. Getting some good fumes here. Sharpie is a alcohol-based marker. Actually, it's petroleum-based marker, but alcohol-based markers and petroleum-based markers will have fumes, so always be sure you have a well-ventilated area. Overlap, overlap. And then here. I use the chisel side because the boldest stroke. Outer boundary. I do like to turn the paper. Sometimes it's just more comfortable for the way my dominant hand works. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Bold strokes. Work my way around. Here's this lovely little triangular negative space shape. Beauty of contour drawings is that they help us understand the role of negative spaces in composition. We start to see and perceive them, start to recognize them as we explore design and drawing. The negative space shapes have potential of huge impact in the story of a composition. There's our contour line and negative space shape composition exercise. We'll sign that. And that is ready to scan in Genius Scan or on a flatbed scanner located in either the CAP library or Bracken library. Some examples from last year. We were positioned ourselves. We spaced ourselves around the building, and I started to draw along with the students. Here's a contour drawing of one of the students drawing, and you can see the differences between line weights here. The overall line of the hoodie and the clothing versus the thinner line of the folds of the fabric of the hoodie, or the differences between the chair itself and the student's clothing there. So an example of one of my contour drawings from last year involving this study here. Here's another potential exercise. This is my Ralph Lauren canvas tote bag, which has some wonderful surfaces and edges and seams and overlaps and negative spaces. Just take your tote bag and just photograph it against a neutral surface for this. You can see the aspect ratio of this photo is a typical 4:3 aspect ratio. So we will use that frame to form our composition in the sketchbook. So either grab this image and as a screen grab, or photograph your own bag for this portion of the exercise. Other examples include plants. If you have house plants, or if you want to take a look at some of the plants either at CAP or in the CAP library or at Bracken library, there are some wonderful interior plants that have some complex edges and shapes and forms. We can use a fat Sharpie marker. I'll show you an example of that in the exercise here to poche out the negative space. And so those are some subjects here. Here's some sketches from last year at the CAP library. Again, we spaced ourselves out. You can see my tiny little clipboard here with a half sheet of paper. Make your drawings at least a half sheet in order to make them legible and recognizable. You can see some layout pencil here, and you can see the contour edges as the plant itself, the potted plant itself, was defined against the window surface there. Simple drawings that involve the negative space or positive space. Complex drawings in that every single negative space and every contour edge is carefully drawn. So this will really exercise your brain. We hope you enjoy this portion of the assignment. Okay, another exercise. I've got my blotter paper from the previous exercise. I'm just going to put that blotter paper underneath here. And I'll put the reference image right there. And you can see that as a 4x3, not a square, so I will proportion that out here on the paper. Do at least a half a sheet. Half sheet of paper also works. In the course of this video though, I need a little bit of space for the picture-in-picture. So that's roughly a 4x3 image there. I'm looking at the image of the tote bag now and taking a look at it, wondering what I can do with it. So I wonder if there are some things there. There's the beginning of the first loop. There's the angle. I can measure that angle with my pencil, closing one eye and adjusting and saying, it's about there. So that portion of the bag coming down into the other loop, carefully going up into the frame and then down. I photographed this bag just against a chair, very easy to do. There's a negative space shape. Made a mistake there. Probably the composition needs sort of end right there. So I'll make that adjustment with an eraser or just by moving on. And that nice contour line there. Nice contour line coming down there and there. The two eyelets that hold the canvas handles against the bag itself. This beautiful contour going up. This overlap, this heavy parachute, not parachute, but fire hose grade canvas. Good quality bag. There's a letter, embroidered letter here on the edge. It becomes its own negative space shape. Stops right there. Something like that. Okay. Portion that out in a pencil. Now I'll come in with ink and just pull a line, boundary. Pulling lines is something, way of sort of teaching our brain and our arm to work together to pull a line. Allows us to make a straighter line than if we were pushing a line. So, well, accountants push pencils when they're making figures. We pull lines to make clear lines. Totally different mentality when it comes to making a drawing. Full line, outer line. This series of folds here. Overlaps. Hit go ahead or broken line for some of these other portions of the canvas. Some really tight stitching in there. Some folds that are really nice. A lot of stitching, which might be represented with pointillism. Some embroidery here around that letter, number. Some really interesting contours and folds and overlaps with this embroidery and with the stitching. Good canvas bag. Now, there's a lot going on in the handle itself. That's a very complex series of stitches, but we don't need to draw all of that. We need to draw just a little bit of it to distinguish that canvas handle from the rest of the bag. So this involves some judgment on our part. It might involve some more line work on the eyelet. I might go around, and we can see now that by adding a little bit more line work to the handle, we've distinguished the handle from the rest of the bag. You can see that series of lines, that reinforced fabric which makes the handle so strong against the other portions of the canvas. And that probably covers the contour lines there. Now, I will just take on, I'm going to do some judgment here with the negative space. I'm going to say that the number is actually negative. I'm going to make it go away by fleshing it in here like this. So, just to make it a more balanced composition, I'm going to make a value judgment and say that the embroidered number that's on the bag disappear into its background like that. And then I will start to fill in the negative space shapes to make an interesting drawing. Look at that negative space shape. It has such a wonderful life now, doesn't it? It's its own thing. Back and forth. You can avoid lifting the pen or pencil and a marker. You find it's much more efficient. While we lift, what we can do with pencil and pen, just contacting the paper as a continuous line, really starts to help build up our confidence. Make sure this is the right angle. The chisel tip, you want to hold it so that the chisel is contacting the paper in the correct position. Fill in any gaps here. And then finally, our last negative space shape here on the right margin. Turn the paper if you can, so it fits your dominant hand's most comfortable direction. And there, combination contour line drawing and negative space drawing of a canvas bag. Go ahead and sign that. And then erase away the extra pencil lines, and that's ready to scan. We conclude with an exercise in lettering. You can see in the CAP161 Module 1 description there are a series of exercises involving contour drawing, negative space drawing, and lettering. Please see the sister video on lettering from Professor Craig Farnsworth listed in your Canvas, instructor's Canvas listing. Thank you very much.